Hello, I'm back in my Game Grid Circuit toy box with Sam Flynn, and today I'm going to finish this racetrack. To save some time, I've already placed most of the Creativa toys that I'm going to need, as well as the boost pads and the vehicle weapon generators. And let me start by showing you where those go. Just ignore the trigger areas and the paths and everything for right now. We'll get back to those. The first set of boost pads go over here, and let me just pick up or highlight this piece of track here at the bottom of that slope on the left. You can kind of see where those boost pads go. So that's the first ones. And then there's really nothing along here as far as boost pads and weapon generators until you get out to this corner of the toy box. And I've got 3 weapon generators set up over here at the top of this ramp. And let me just select this piece of track here so you can see where those go. And I've shown you in previous racetracks how to place those and activate them, so I'm not going to do that again this time. To save a little time, I'm just going to show you where they go. And you can place those and turn them on yourself. The next weapon generator goes over here, right at the edge of this fork. So this is where this one goes. You can see the racetrack seam there on the right. Okay, and then after you come through the tunnels, there are 2 vehicle weapon generators down here on the end, like you see here, and you can see how those are placed. And then the last thing we have as far as those go, there's a single boost pad around the corner over here, and you can see where that one sits. So that's it for the boost pads and the weapon generators. Now, we'll make another pass around the track, and we'll hook up the other track features as we go. And the first one is going to be for the lightning at the top of that huge tower. So for that, we need a level starter. We need an effects generator and a button. And go ahead and hook up the effects generator first. So we'll do a new locator connection. And I've already placed a locator way up here at the top of the tower. It's a long way up. That will be the effects location. And then to start that, we'll come over to our level starter, do a new logic connection on Catalyze, come over to our effects generator, and we're going to play Looped. Out of the electric effects drawer, we're going to do Lightning Strike 1. And because we're already in the toy box, I've got this button set up here. So we'll do a new logic connection when pressed, come over to our level starter, and start. So now we can come out of the editor and push the button. And of course you're not going to really be able to see that here in the city. But you will be able to see it from the Outlands. And there it goes. All right. The next feature, as we come around the first turn from the starting point of the race, we run into this trigger area that I've stretched across the track. And when the players go through this trigger area, we're going to generate a recognizer that's going to fly at them along the track. And so we have the trigger area set up there. And I've got a vehicle summoner down here on top of the cliff. And I've also dropped the path. Oh, and by the way, I've got boost pads down here. You can see where those are placed, and the vehicle weapon generators over here. I missed those first time around. But for the path, the starting point is right here, hidden behind this cliff from the players as they drive through that trigger area down that way. And you can kind of look at the ground and figure where this is at. The exact placement of these points doesn't matter, but as we come around this corner, I've dropped some paths and focus on the yellow main path for right now. So it flies down along the edge of this road, and then it turns and goes across the road. To just before the trigger area, and then it starts to go upward, and it comes around the corner of this cliff, and I've got a trigger area set up here where the path dead ends. And so as the recognizer flies into this, then we can remove it from the toy box. And then I've also set up a couple of branching paths off of this, which I don't know that you necessarily need, but I thought it would be a little more interesting if the recognizers didn't always fly the same path. So this first one comes out off of the point you saw back there, flies over alongside of the track, and then makes a little bit sharper cross across the track and heads up into that trigger area. The other one branches off the next point along the path, which is back here. And this one flies a little bit more down across the middle of the road here, and then goes up and into the trigger area. So there's a couple of different ways you could hook this up, and I'm going to show you both ways. So this first way here, on this trigger area, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We're going to come over to our vehicle weapon, our vehicle summoner rather. And in the toy box category, you'll scroll down to the recognizer. And right now that'll spawn on top of this summoner, which we don't want. So on the vehicle summoner, we'll do a new path connection. We'll connect that up to our path over here. And on the vehicle summoner properties, under the generated vehicle options, we want to orient along the path, and the other two properties are fine. So every time a player drives through that trigger area down there, we're going to kick off a new recognizer that will start flying along this path, and it'll take one of the branching paths. It'll travel over this way until it enters this trigger area back here. And when it does that, we want to do a new logic connection when entered by vehicle. We want to come back over to the vehicle summoner. And we want to remove all. And this will have the unfortunate side effect if you have players that are kind of far apart from each other. So the first player drives through there, generates the recognizer, and it may travel quite a ways along here before the second player drives through this trigger area, which will spawn a second one of those. But when the first one passes into this trigger area back here, that'll remove both recognizers. And so the player who's a little behind might see their recognizer, the second recognizer, kind of vanish right out of the air here, but there's not really much you can do about that. And it's really not that disturbing because I've played through it. It just looks like maybe it blew up or something. Alright, on the path properties, everything under here is pretty much the default. I set the speed though to 300. So that is the first way to do the recognizer, and it's not really an obstacle, but it's just kind of fun seeing something flying through the world. It lets you know that this world is alive. It just makes it seem more alive to the player because there are things happening that aren't necessarily directly related to the player. Over here we have a second set of controls to do basically the same thing. So I have a trigger area set up across the road here, and one over here that the path dead ends into. This one's a little bit different though, because in addition to the vehicle summoner, I have a randomizer set up. And before I get to that, let's look at where this path is. So this point starts here on the edge of this terrain, goes up over the ridge there, and flies over this way and down the middle of the road. You can kind of see how high up above the road that is. And then it goes down the middle of the curve here, and then off to the side into that trigger area. So the other way to hook this up, if you don't want to see a recognizer every time you come through here, is to use a randomizer. And so on this trigger area, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. Instead of going directly to the vehicle summoner, we'll come over to the randomizer. And we'll do action. And on the randomizer, we'll do a new logic connection on random trigger 1. Come over to our vehicle summoner, go to toy box and recognizer. And I'm going to do the same thing for random trigger 2. Toy box, recognizer. Now after you've hooked those up, if you come into the randomizer and go to the properties, you'll notice hooking up those triggers has caused it to set the value here to 5 for just those two. The rest of these are 0, which means these trigger signals will never get selected. Only these two will ever be selected, and both of these are going to generate a randomizer. So if you want to have signals go out that aren't connected to anything and won't generate a recognizer, then we want to come in here and turn all of these on to the same value of 5. And what this means now is that when the randomizer is invoked, it has basically a 1 in 5 chance of invoking either of these two trigger signals. Other times it'll invoke these, but these aren't connected to anything, so nothing will happen. So every time the player drives through that trigger area over there, it's got a 1 in 5 chance of generating a recognizer. And once again, we don't want it showing up on top of this pad, we want it on the path. So on the vehicle summoner, we'll do a new path connection, connect it over here. And again, the properties on this path are set up the same as the other one. And like before, when the vehicle enters this trigger area over here, we want to take the recognizer out. So new logic connection when entered by vehicle. Come over to our vehicle summoner. And remove all. So those are the two different ways that you can hook those up. You can have the trigger area go direct to the vehicle summoner, or you can use a randomizer so that you don't have a vehicle every time you come through there. It's a little less predictable that way, and that's not a bad thing. All right, next let's do the barrier across the shortcut over here. So for that we need a time delayer and a replayer, and I've got a button set up over at the starting line. So on the replayer, let's start with that. Under the properties, we'll set the playback interval to 0. And I'm going to pick this up just to get us to that part of the drawer very quickly. And then we'll go ahead and step on the replayer, which opens the menu in the lower right corner. And on my Wii U, I press B to start recording. And it's funny, every time I use the replayer, I always say what system I'm on, but I always get comments from people asking me, what system are you on? I am on a Wii U. Alright, we need to make sure that these barriers will clear this hill over here. So I can't be right up against the edge of this. So we got to be out just a little bit. And the first one's going to go here. The second one's going to go right there. And we'll step on the replayer once more to get that menu in the lower right. I press B again to stop recording. And there we go. And at this point, I can go ahead and delete that barrier. For the time delayer, whoops, I didn't mean to pick it up and move it. I want to open up the logic menu, go into the properties, and I'm going to set the delay time to be 5 seconds. That should be long enough to give the replayer there a chance to clear. Alright, so when the race is over, I've got a reset button over here at the starting line that the player can use to reset the course. And so on this button, we'll do a new logic connection when pressed. First thing we'll do is come over to that replayer and clear it, which will take those barriers out. And if they've been destroyed, then it doesn't do anything, but it does clear the replayer. Okay. And then the other thing the button needs to do is restore those barriers. That's why we have the time delayer, to give the replayer a few seconds to clear itself. So on the button, a new logic connection when pressed. Come over to that time delayer and start that delay. And it takes a little while to travel out here. This is a huge toy box. Alright, and then on the time delayer, new logic connection. When the delay is completed, we'll come to the replayer and playback. And that will put the starting barriers back. And that's really all there is to that. And you've seen me do that in some other tracks. Okay, the next obstacle are the fans. And that's going to allow the player to get up to this upper level. So let's come down to the terrain category. Because we're going to need to put in a few terrain blocks here. I'm going to start with this long, tiny, and thin block, and we're going to put it right up here on the edge of that track, just like this. This won't be its final location, but it'll serve as a spacer for now, and I'm going to set the theme for this to be Flynn's World. And you got to give it a moment to go. There it goes. And I like this because the edge of it is black, so it's not going to be very noticeable. All right. We'll use that as a spacer. Let's go now up to the platforming toys drawer. If we go to the right a little bit, we have these Nowhere floor fans. These are from the Guardians of the Galaxy playset. And I'm going to line the left edge of it up with that block and the bottom edge with that block. And we're going to put down a row of 4 of these across. All right, and then we're going to come out here to the front and drop down 1 level. We're going to put another row of 4. And then we'll do the same thing again. These will go directly on the ground. Oops, not there. Like that. And we'll go ahead and pick up this terrain block now. And I'm going to drop it down and bring it forward. Put it right under the front edge of those fans. We'll put another one over here on that corner, and then I need a couple little cubes in the middle to fill that gap. Alright, and then under the next layer down, we'll use this block. Put one on either end. And put a couple of these long, tiny, and thin blocks under that. And that just kind of helps hide the road that's under there. It gives those something to sit on. And then the last thing we need is a ramp to get the players up onto those fans. So we'll come to the racetrack pieces. We'll go to the right. I need the wide ramp. So the steep wide ramp, I've already set the style for my racetrack pieces. This will go right up against those fans, just like that. And there we go. There's the fans. So there's no logic there. It's just a matter of placing them in the right spot and putting a ramp on the front so that they can carry the player up to this upper level. All right. So that's it for this end of the toy box. The next feature is the first Ultron core. And that's up here, right in front of the split, right behind the vehicle weapon generator. And you can see where the path placement is. It's right in the ground. You could put this one notch below the ground if you want, but that's where I placed mine. And if you want to know how high that other point is that I placed, the second point, we can come over to this tall block. You can kind of use that for a guide. That shows you where that point is. It's about one notch below the top edge of that block. So it's about 2.5 blocks off the ground. Again, a block being one of those. The Ultron core is part of the Marvel Battlegrounds playset, and if you've unlocked it, it's in the set pieces drawer right here. And if you don't have that, because you're on PC or you don't have that playset, there's not a lot of good options you could use. You could put a block there and use a block as a barrier. You could use the King Candy piece from the Toy Box Speedway Sugar Rush set. That would be kind of a funny piece to use, but it would work. But I'm going to place the Ultron core up here, excuse me, above the track out of the way. So we'll go ahead and do a new path connection on him. We're going to connect up to our path point here. And we need to set the properties on him. Everything under here is good, but we need to change the movement style to back and forth. And that provides a nice, simple obstacle that makes it a little tricky to get to that weapon generator. Of course, he doesn't come all the way to the ground. If you wanted him to do that, like I said, you could drop the path point here. And we could take this one notch a little bit lower. And you can see that brings him all the way to the ground. That makes it a little bit harder even. All right. Oh, and the path point properties, you probably need to see that. If I can get to it. There we go. My goodness, that was a challenge. For the properties on the path, it's basically all the defaults. The next feature is a second Ultron core, and that one's going to get hooked up basically the exact same way. The difference is, instead of going up and down, he goes back and forth. I don't know what's wrong with my voice today, but this is where that path is placed. It's right across from these blocks here. And again, the path properties on here are the exact same settings as the other one. And for the Ultron core, it's hooked up the exact same way. So I'll put this up in the air just to get it out of the way. Open up the logic menu, do a new path connection. Connect up to this path. And then we got to set the properties on him and change the movement style to back and forth. And that provides a nice obstacle to avoid, especially with the holes in the road here. Now the last obstacle is the smoke down below. And for that we have another effects generator. And I've added a button that we can use to turn that off if we need to. The key for this is the locator placement. And I'll show you when we get all done why we have so many locators and why the placement of these is so critical. But you can see I have some of them in the ground, about a block above the ground, and I've got some of them on the ground. And so you can kind of see where these first set of ground locators are right here. If I show you where the road is and try to get to a point here where you can see this is the piece of track that is right before the split. All right. And if you come out almost to the edge of the track, that's where you find these locators on the ground. So the track edge is on the left there. This is one little block back if you use those little squares or blocks that are on the terrain racetrack texture. So this one's set up right here. There's one across the way right there. And then the next set of these, you can count off the number of squares from the one we're on to the one in the upper right corner. And that's where this one is placed. And again, there's one directly across the track from that. There's another one on the middle of the track up there on the right. So you can count off again the number of squares in this shot. And then come up here. And again, I'm trying to get to a point. Okay, you can see on the left there the edge of the track. And then there's another set over here. Again, count off a number of squares from that center one there. And this one doesn't have one directly across the track. This one's out in front just a little bit. So you can see the placement of that one with respect to the previous one. And then count off the number of squares to the next one up there. And this one is placed in the middle of the track, right underneath the center of that hole. So that's where all the locators are on the bottom level. And there's also a few up in the air. So the first ones are here. You can kind of see where they are with respect to that center one there. And the terrain track seam on the left. And there's one directly across the way in not quite the same position. And then the next one, if we come back about 2 blocks back, 2 squares back rather, looking at the track texture, that's where this one is. And then there's another one back here just a little bit behind that one. And then if we come back a little bit further, here's where these are. Again, you can kind of look at the ground, you can look at the hole up above to kind of see where these are placed. And the placement of these is critical, so I will explain why shortly. And then there's another one over the middle of the track. You can kind of see where it is with respect to the previous ones that I showed. And then there's two more over here. And on the left you can see the very first locators that I showed. This is where this one is with respect to those. And there's another one right here. So once you have all of those placed, you're going to come up to the effects generator up here. Open the logic menu and do a new locator connection and hook up to each and every one of those. And I've already done that, as you can see. And then once you've done that, come over to the level starter. Do a new logic connection on catalyze. Come back to the effects generator, and we're going to play looped out of the smoke category, the large area smoke. And if we need to, we can use this button to turn it off, so a new logic connection when pressed. Come over here to the effects generator and stop looping the effects. And I found that helpful when I was building this and setting it up to be able to turn that off at times. So once again, we'll come over to our button that's hooked up to the level starter. And we'll go ahead and start that. So that should start that effects generator. But I want you to notice, if we come out over here to the entrance to that tunnel, and you look down that way, you'll notice there is no smoke that you can see. And so it's not until you get closer that the effects generator will actually start generating the smoke. And when it does that, initially you're going to have very limited smoke, and it's not really going to obscure much. And so that's why we have that one solitary locator sitting out here, and then a bunch of them towards the back, so that as we get deeper in, now it's becoming harder to see until you pass that last pair of locators that I showed you that are up in the air. And so that makes it really thick. And that's why we have a pretty dense set of locators down towards the end here, and not quite so many out this way. Because the smoke isn't going to be like you see it right now. Because right now, if it were like this all the time, you can see it gets pretty thick. I can't see the end of that track. But as we get further away from that, the effects generator will stop working, and all that smoke clears. And so as you come through that tunnel, and it starts generating the smoke, you can still see the end of the tunnel there, and it's not generating anything. So that's why we need all of those locators, and we need them packed closer together on this end, is to make that smoke an effective barrier. And that took some time to play with that. So that's why I wanted to show you that, and why the placement of all of those locators matters so much. But that's it now for my Game Grid circuit. This toy box is completed. Next Friday, we'll join Darth Vader on my Death Star Derby track. I gave you an early look at this track on May 4th, but now you'll get to see the final version of it and how to build it. You won't want to miss that, so be sure to come back next Friday, or better yet, subscribe to my channel by clicking my photo in the lower right corner, and make sure your notifications are on. Thank you for watching, and have a great weekend.